In November 1994, a little entity known as Beverly Hills Internet was formed out of 9401 Wilshire Boulevard. It began as a web hosting and development company, but quickly set up its own web directory, and by December 15th, 1995, had become GeoCities, allowing users to develop free homepages within online neighborhoods. Thankfully, since then, websites have advanced, so thank you to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. More on that later. But this wasn't as bad as it sounds. Here was a playground for the early internet, a place where people could log on, play with the technology, and carve out a piece of it for their own. It was beautiful in its own way. In this original incarnation, a series of cities were set up. These would act as a rough index for the directory, with each city containing sites relevant to its name. For example, Area 51 would be home to science fiction, conspiracy theories, or other goings-on of the outer limits. Hollywood would house sites about films, entertainment, or actors. Silicon Valley was dedicated to computers and technology. Tokyo was where you'd find anime, stuff like that. If the named city was stereotyped in some way, that's what you'd find within. These cities, or neighbourhoods as they quickly became known, expanded over time, but as a user all you had to do was navigate to your chosen neighbourhood, select a district, initially commercial or residential, find a spare address and then pitch your tent. You could then name your site whatever you wanted, and put on it, well, whatever you wanted. It was the freedom to create which really drew people in, the ability to make your mark in this glorious new online world. If you wanted to create a decent site, you really had to know or be willing to learn HTML, although basic WYSIWYG tools evolved as the service went on. What this led to was a lot of people learning how to create basic websites, a handy skill especially back then. By 1999, GeoCities was the third most visited website behind Yahoo and AOL, a completely different world to the Google and social media dominated landscape of today. But then, as well as being an internet directory, GeoCities was really, well, it could be classed as one of the first social networks. Here was an environment which allowed communities to prosper, communicate and express themselves in a manner which still stands today. And that's really thanks to various attempts to preserve the sites. Yahoo would acquire GeoCities in 1999 and indeed keep it running until October 2009, but before it went, organisations like the Internet Archive and Archive Team, along with various others, made attempts to archive some of the 38 million websites hosted on the service. A recent attempt, in fact, from earlier this year, is the GeoCities Gallery, which aims to list the archived sites in a manner which gives easy navigation whilst retaining as much of their functionality as possible, and this includes the various MIDI files which would play when loading up a site. Seriously, you cannot get away from this. Anyway, I thought it would be nice to take a browse through some of these sites and bathe in the beauty that was GeoCities. Let's begin in Area 51, always one of the more interesting neighbourhoods. Alright, so there's a lot of sites to pick from, many of them unfinished, many of them utterly pointless, so I'm just going to present the ones I find most interesting. Content-wise, not much has changed on the internet today. There's always a bizarre conspiracy making headway among folk who aren't quite willing to complete all the logical steps. Now don't get me wrong, I love a good conspiracy as much as the next person, but the ones which seem to gain the most traction aren't necessarily the ones which need pursuing the most. But if you're looking for an excellent story or two, then there's sites aplenty here. here's an interesting one, Quasar Cosmos. As well as being a fan of Star Trek and Babylon 5, this chap has created a list of future predictions. It starts off a bit grim and there's a nuclear winter in 2013, but by 2015 the Armstrong colony should be firmly established on the moon. Cryogenics are perfected in 2019, and in 2020 Al Gore is elected president of the US. Well, my friend, I'm not sure whether you're currently disappointed or in a state of contentment about the actual world outcome, but at least we don't have World War III yet. I'll tell you what we do have though, an easier way to create and publish websites, and they look just a little bit better too. Squarespace allows you to create websites with or without 90s GIFs, usually without, and it allows you to do it quickly whilst looking professional. None of this then. Rather than plonking your site in a community category, you can unleash it directly onto the web with just a few clicks. Head on over to squarespace.com/nostalgianerd for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Also, check out the site I made whilst you're there. Alright, back to the 90s. So, alongside sites dedicated to Jennifer Lopez and lingerie, we've also got completely wholesome content like this site dedicated to trading Star Trek customizable game cards. How cool is that? And I just find the amateur style on these pages so endearing. A quick look at the source code shows that this page was created using the Yahoo page builder, but it's just so crudely done, probably even more so because of it. All these ampersand NBSP semicolon parts are HTML character entities which force a space, so most of the spacing on the page is just done by stringing loads of spaces together. Delightfully crude. This was the Wild West of the internet. But the thing about GeoCities was the neighbourhood rules were about as loose as your mum. Many of these sites really shouldn't be in the Area 51 grouping, but as long as there was an address spare, you could create whatever you liked in there. So I'm just going to select sites at random from any neighbourhood and see what we end up with. Here's a good one, Jeff's Doom and Quake page, because if there's one thing the 90s were about, it's Doom and Quake. Another thing pertinent to the 90s was desktop themes, and here Jeff has kindly provided a variety of ones to download for our pleasure. Thanks, Jeff. Turns out he was also a fan of MechWarrior, so there's a site dedicated to that as well. Good to see some appropriate GIFs on show too. Good on you, Jeff. What about Dave's tunnel ride? Quite a nice GIF. Would have looked pretty decent on a 640 by 480 screen in the 90s. Unfortunately, it breaks after that, and this is where you need to use the full power of the internet. By stripping out the GeoCities part of this link, we can then search for that in the Internet Archive, adding geocities.com onto the start, and then find out what Dave's homepage actually was. And here we are, another Star Trek and Homer Simpson fan. Like so many GeoCities creators. His entire CV is on here if you want to read it, but it just shows you how personal so many of these sites were. This really was a social platform where people just wanted to be heard, but not in the same way a lot of YouTube commenters do. Hello, I just wanted to say you didn't pronounce GeoCities correctly. It's actually GeoCities. Ha, you wanker. It's a much more wholesome way. God, I miss the early internet. Now here's a site that was updated in the final years of GeoCities. Here's James. He's a PhD student at the University of Minnesota, and what we have here is a multiple choice adventure that helps him find a wife. The correct route is to go to the ISNA convention, then check out the lobby, go back home, and then apparently you find a fiancé. As games go, it's crap. Probably the worst game I've played, and I'm including the N64 Superman in that. But at least James has found a wife, or a fiancé at least. In fact, I'm going to email him and ask him if he's married. Oh, and tell him he's lucky because the site tells me to do that. Excellent! There we go. If I hear back, I'll post an update on my Twitter, so that'll give you something to look forward to. Here's another one which was updated in 2008. Matt Draper's homepage. Now, what I like about Matt is he has absolutely no idea what this homepage is for. He's got a random list there, an apologetic statement here, but he hasn't got a clue. 9 years this site has been in development for. 9 years. But you know what he does know? He knows he bloody loves pizza. He's got a picture of pizza right at the top, and I bet you that's been there for the full 9 years. That's all that matters. Well done, Matt. Well done, you're an inspiration. Here's Chris's homepage. Delightful music, Chris. Now, Chris has a love of many things. Calgary, inline skating, fly fishing, but I'm interested in computers. I've been playing around with computers and programming for over 12 years now. I got hooked in the days of the TI-99 4A. I'm currently using a Pentium 90 running Windows 95 networked to a 486DX2 66 running Windows for Workgroups 3.11. Oh, Chris, this is what I'm talking about. Just a small chunk of personal computing history recorded for all to see some 20 years on. One thing people in the Silicon Valley neighbourhood like doing, other than putting visitor counters on their sites, is listing software and computing-related resources. But this was important back then. Search engines were pretty useless, so having a selection of links to noteworthy sites was highly beneficial and often bookmarked. Look, here's some lists on a different site, but I bloody love this site. Really embracing what a nice GeoCities website could look like. And yes, you can definitely see a bitterness in some of the moods here as the internet began to progress to what it is now. Lumix shares his pages in total harmony with the philosophy of the internet in the 90s. Here was a site from only 2002 already feeling resentment to the internet marketing, aggressive Javas, dancing images and banners which were invading their lives. Sounds like an anti-EU campaigner I was speaking to the other week. Lumix was more than happy with a 33.6K dial-up modem, a few 16-colour images and text links. That's what he liked, nothing more. And that's really what GeoCities is filled with. The limited knowledge of most of its users means that even in the noughties, sites were made in the crudest and simplest of fashions. And I'm just grateful that it's possible to still go and browse them. You can even download the entire archive torrent if you're feeling brave. But look, I could spend all day here going from site to site, but instead I'm going to do a few streams on a perhaps well-known streaming site, which I won't mention the name of, and I'm going to drop a load of links in the description so you can have a browse of GeoCities yourself, because really there's nothing quite like it. And that's probably what the women in these photos were saying as well. It's really like being in the past for a small moment of time. And after all, isn't that why you're here? It's why I'm here. So, I'll catch you again soon, but in the meantime, thanks for watching and have a great evening.